Welcome to another episode of Witty CFB. Your host, Rob Sheply here. And on today's episode, we got Kaleb Kraus joining us, contributing writer from Spartan Avenue and Last Word on Sports. Kaleb, it's really exciting to have you on, especially with the season that Michigan State's about to have. I'm definitely intrigued with the direction that they're going in, given that they have Jonathan Smith, Aidan Chiles, and definitely some new contributing faces there too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, first off, thanks for having me on. Yeah, got a lot of new faces. I mean, the receiving core alone has really got me intrigued because technically there's only really one returning starter there, and it's Nick Marsh, who obviously highly touted receiver, broke into the starting rotation last year as a true freshman, and clearly the talent to be that number one receiver that Michigan State's historically had top level receivers in their history. So I think he's right in line to be that next great receiver.
Exactly. And I guess what fascinates me about Michigan State, at least this season in particular, right, is we talked about this off camera, and I think this is a stat worth mentioning. You mentioned off camera that Michigan State hasn't had a single 1,000-yard rusher since 2014. So it's fascinating to see like kind of what direction they're going to go. And I think they're going to be passing the ball probably even more this year. I know you said they have a number of different weapons coming in, and also the offensive line, at least for me when I was watching this year, was definitely one of the single biggest issues I saw, particularly just getting just plagued with injuries left and right. It got difficult to watch sometimes.
Yeah, it certainly was an issue. I mean, it's been an issue for several years now. I mean when Smith, you can look at last year for example. When Smith got here, they were I went to their little spring thing they had last year, and they didn't even have enough linemen to play a scrimmage per se
Right.
while they were at it. So they addressed the offensive line.
Yeah, because the Big Ten is one of those conferences where if you're not really recruiting, particularly in the trenches, you're just going to get left behind. Especially when you look at the schedule and you say to yourself, "Hey, they're playing some really tough teams. Or you're going to have to play Penn State this year. You're going to play Iowa this year. You're going to play Nebraska this year." All these teams who, at least historically speaking, are just consistent and just hard hitting teams too, especially, when you look at the defense side of the ball, the pass rush was definitely something that's going to be a serious question mark for them this year too.
Yeah, because returning production is just not there on the defensive line. I mean, I thought my biggest concern for him was going to be offensive line going into the season, but the more I look at it, it might be that defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, because even, in hindsight, I go back and I think of that initial game beginning of the year. I don't want to traumatize you too much here, but I go back and I think about that Florida Atlantic game, and that game, I don't even think they deserved to win that game, quite frankly, but it was just it was just surprising just how much they really struggled out of the gate there, and how much of those issues that you saw in the beginning of the season, such as a team like Florida Atlantic, you see how many of those issues that they had, just like I elaborated on, were still present even going into November too.
Right. And the secondary just got so worn down with injuries. It was what it was by the end of the year.
Yeah, because I guess too, right? We definitely expected Michigan State to be in a little bit of a rebuild, right? Because we know that he's bringing in a bunch of his guys from Oregon State. We knew that they were a younger team. We knew that the offensive line in general were just a bunch of young guys who were going to kind of figure out their way. So I'd probably even argue that 5-7 is probably maybe even better than what people thought in general. But now we see Aidan Chiles again. And like I said, I think the talent is obvious, right? But I definitely want to get your thoughts on what do you see from him in terms of his potential, and what are some things that Michigan State fans should keep an eye on as they try to utilize him to the best of their ability, both as a passer and a rusher.
I mean, he struggled last year. There's no it's no secret. He struggled. He struggled to take care of the ball. Both there were costly fumbles, the picks. I mean, I hadn't seen a Spartan quarterback throw that many picks in several years. But like you said, he has the talent, and there's no denying that. He was highly rated. I mean, it was shocking that he even ended up at Oregon State to begin with when he was coming out of high school. But now that he's in his third year with Coach Smith, and he's got plenty of support around him to make himself even better this year. I mean, the Iowa game last year, that was his best game.
Yeah, especially too, I was one of the best defensive teams in the entire conference. So for him to, pick apart that defense like he did, definitely shows that there's something there for all the frustrations that you had as the season progressed offensively.
Yeah, and Iowa can be frustrating because like the way they play defense, they had an offense, they'd be competing for the Big Ten every year.
Yeah, that's what I mean too. And we talked about this a little bit off camera too about their wide receiver room, and yeah, they might have a legit number one, but aside from that, it seems like they're going to have to be relying upon a lot of guys who are, I guess we can say, unproven.
They came from
with that
portal
said,
guys.
How do you think Michigan State's offense is going to change schematically? Do you anticipate them throwing the ball more or relying on that rushing attack, or do you think it's going to be more balanced?
I mean, based on what I've seen from Coach Smith, it seems like he wants there to be the balance. I mean, arguably, I think the tight end room might be where you want to start to help develop that run game, because they got weapons in the tight end room. Just for whatever reason last year, I thought Jack Belling was going to be better than he was.
Yeah, and even too, I was kind of thinking to myself, at least from a Michigan State perspective, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot more jumbo sets this year, a lot more two tight end sets, where especially for an offensive line who, although I think is a little bit more experienced now since they brought in a number of transfers, I think there's still going to be some growing pains. And fortunately, they are going to be playing a relatively soft non-conference schedule, so hopefully that should help them move that along a little bit too. But you're right, though. I mean, the tight end room is probably one of the silver linings of this team. I would say, where they definitely can be utilized as receivers, sure, but I'd probably argue that they're mainly going to be seen, particularly as more blockers too.
Right, because right now I don't think there's not an established number one back right now either, running back. I mean,
yeah, so it's
they're pretty young there.
A committee.
Right. I mean, they brought in Elijah Tolliver, transfer, but he coming from a much lower level, so it's hard to really say that's going to translate.
Yeah, because even when I sit down and, in preparation of this, I was looking into some of the receivers that they brought in. You have Krishawn McCray from Kent State, Amari Kelly from Middle Tennessee, and Ronnie Billiard from Valdosta State. Like you said, a bunch of smaller schools, and in particular, a lot of speedsters on that program. Not of these guys, not a lot of guys who are not necessarily tall and build and everything. It's a lot of guys that they're going to be relying upon to be speedsters and maybe make some explosive plays too. So I think it's another thing that kind of intrigued me about particularly some of the guys that they brought in. I think you're going to see that as the season progresses.
And they might actually have a good return man. That's lacked since Jaden Reed graduated.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm sure you know about this too, but one of the even bigger issues too, aside from, we talk about the offensive line a little bit, we talked about the lack of the pass rush, but even just some of the special teams errors that we saw and arguably probably cost them at least a game or two last year. I mean, I think of all the blocked kicks, for example, some of the issues that they had on 3rd and 4th down, and how just little mistakes like that are just letting teams extend drives for no good reason too, whether you want to talk about
keeping their
penalties,
long
turnovers, red zone efficiency.
keeping the long snapper healthy.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, their starting long snapper last year, Sheply, got hurt, and they weren't the same at that spot. Had to have a reserve linebacker snapping the rest of the year,
which is crazy too, because you would think
that puts a lot of pressure on everybody else.
Exactly, you would think as someone in the Big Ten they would have that sort of ability to have some. Well, I guess you don't really ever think about your long snapper getting hurt, right? But at the same time, you definitely have to hope that this is just kind of.
I've seen it happen twice at Michigan State now, so obviously it does happen.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I hope I didn't bring any bad luck or anything too, but I mean, like I said, Michigan State is one of those programs too where, in the past 10 years they've gone 54 and 54. So very, I guess, statistically speaking, average, right? But I think a lot of the time we're at the point now where, we're past the Mel Tucker drama. We're long enough away from the era of Mark D'Antonio, and now we're in this new era of Jonathan Smith, where I think it's the one thing I give Michigan State a lot of credit for is I think they're going to give Jonathan Smith time. And I think it's pretty clear that from the transfers that they brought in, that they understand he's going to need extra resources, especially now to really compete in this era of the transfer portal, the NIL, which leads me to talk about Jay Batt real quick, who just signed a 6-year deal to leave Georgia Tech to become their athletic director at Michigan State. So from what you know about Jay Batt, like what are your general thoughts about that addition?
I think it's a good move. I mean, they got to do something different because obviously, no offense to the previous AD, Alan Haller, he brought in a lot of good hires in the much smaller sports. Wasn't really doing much to help the football program, which is crazy to me given the fact he played football there. So it was like, and with the new guy, I think he's more of a he's willing to do some things that need to be done to get, because Michigan State has a very large alumni base that clearly the programs are not using to the ability that I feel like they could use them to, whether that's money for NIL purposes, whatnot, that kind of thing.
And especially too, I mean, you've been to East Lansing, I'm sure, a number of times. You've been to Spartan Stadium. I mean, it is an incredible atmosphere too, and especially just how many resources that they have. You would think that they would be able to tap into that a lot more now, knowing that, obviously some of these bigger schools are coming in. Like you have competing with USC now, you have UCLA coming in, and also you have some of these other schools like Indiana and Iowa, and Northwestern's even if they get some more resources. I mean, even they're building a new stadium too. So
that new stadium looks pretty dang cool there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm it's on my bucket list to at least go there for at least a Wrigley Field game, ideally. But it's one of those things where the Big Ten, I mean, it's only going to get tougher too. I mean, even they play Michigan State plays Maryland at the end of the year too, and that's going to be a big question mark too. I mean, that's the one thing you got to give Maryland credit for is they're always pretty solid at recruiting, particularly within state.
Well, that game will be a real toss-up because it's at Ford Field.
Exactly. And, as you look at the schedule too, obviously non-conference speaking, not too shabby. I mean, you play Western Michigan, one of the better teams in the MAC. That should be a win. You play a tough Boston College team, but I'd probably say you could
who they are, Spartans could have were in position to beat last year.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point too. And then after
that's one of those games. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then you have Youngstown State after that too, and then you go on the road versus USC, and then they have a couple tough games after that. But when you sit down and look at the schedule, like what were some initial thoughts and particularly some conference games that you're really penciling in and saying to yourself like, hey, this game could really be a game that I talk about in November and December when you're writing for Last Word on Sports or Spartan Avenue?
I think that the October 11th home game against UCLA, because that's one of them. You got that opportunity to catch them sleeping because it's a noon kick. So that's like a 9 a.m. kick for them. And you get the job done in that game, especially at home. I mean, they went 2-5 at home last season. Definitely got to get better at home. If you can't win your home games, you're not going to be competing come November. So, but that one I circle. And what's Michigan going to look like? They come here. Obviously, bad blood's been boiling back and forth these last handful of years. That game, I think it's the ultimate toss-up this year because do we know who's going to be coaching? Not trying to say that something's going to happen in Ann Arbor, but
yeah, and even too, I mean, at least from what I've heard from other Michigan beat writers, that it seems like Bryce Underwood's going to get the job. So it's more or less it's more or less of how quickly does he transition into being that starter. And I think also too, I think they're going to maybe baby him a little bit. I'm not saying it in a necessarily a bad way. I'm just meaning more or less like, hey, their bread and butter is still going to be running the ball and dominating you in the trenches too, which I think could be really, just like you said, a gain for Michigan State to say, hey, I know on paper that could be a big question mark for us, but if they can at least get to the quarterback, get to Bryce Underwood a little bit and pressure him, I think that could be a game that I think could surprise some people.
Mm-hmm.
And you even brought up UCLA too. I mean, obviously, we all know about the story about Nico. We know Deshaun Foster, very similarly, Jonathan Smith going to his second year. So that's just another team where, at least in my opinion, I'd probably argue Michigan State probably does have more talent than them and more resources. But at the same time, it's, can Michigan State really kind of put that together and, win those games that they probably should be favored to win. And as it stands right now, I believe the Vegas has their odds at 5.5 wins. Does that sound about right to you? Five or six wins?
Probably.
Yeah, because even when I was looking at this schedule just, before we were talking here, I think there's a pretty good shot they can make a bowl game here. I mean, I know it's not really ideal having to play Penn State, Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota. I think you're probably going to have to steal one of those games if you do to make a bowl game. Because let's say if they do slip versus a UCLA or, a Boston College, for example, they're going to have to pick up one of those games back. But at the same time, too, just given you brought up a lot of good points about their offensive line and their pass rush, if we can see some examples of that improving in the right way and Aidan Chiles kind of turning the corner and making less mistakes, maybe another 5-7 or a 6-6 season, maybe on paper sounds shitty, but at the same time, if you're just kind of looking at it from the glass half full sort of thing, it's really not all that bad.
Right. I mean, I think they'll have some confidence if they can start 3-0 and not stumble at home in their first 3 games.
Your links to Last Word on Sports and Spartan Avenue for everybody to check you out too. And if you're on Twitter, I think they call it X now, so I'll definitely make sure to have everything there too.
Okay. Thanks again.
Yeah.